Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest this week is Alicia Hawley. Alicia is a senior discovery attorney at Orrick. Alicia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, glad to have you here. Before we get into the substance, if you will, of what we're going to talk about, I'd like you to first tell us how in the world you got into this world of eDiscovery and talk a little about what you do today, where you are at now.
Yeah. So I've been around for a long time in eDiscovery, sort of from the transition from paper files to actual electronic discovery. That was early in my career. I was a young associate when that was all happening. And I started off my career as a white collar criminal defense attorney at a big law firm, which I really, really loved. That kind of work focuses a lot on factual development and narrative development and investigations of, figuring out what happened and who did what. I mean, that's really how litigation always is. But in the white collar space, it's more heightened because it tends to be more factually, the factual narrative tends to be really important because there's fewer laws that you're trying to sort of like get your story to fit into. So when the paper stuff was happening and we were transitioning into email review and like iConnect, if you remember iConnect, some of those old things, I really took an interest in this idea of the discovery phase, which I had been spending a lot of my time on anyways, custodian interviews, witness interviews, looking through documents and putting together timelines and stories and who did what when. And so it ended up being sort of a natural transition for me from that white collar space into eDiscovery. A lot of the same skill sets were required. And I didn't really know at the time that I was going to be on the sort of leading edge of what has turned into a big revolution in the legal industry, because obviously it's just rapidly changing and it's such an important field that we're in today.
You could easily have continued on the traditional white collar criminal or white collar defense work side of things. I mean, that's what most lawyers do.
Yeah.
You shifted over to eDiscovery. Why?
I don't know. I just thought it was so interesting. I really I have previously no tech experience. Like it's not like I was like a tech person or had some particular interest in technology and the overlap between technology and the practice of law. Like that wasn't even on my radar. I just think I was so interested in, and I still to this day really am interested in developing the narrative in the discovery process. It's something that I think is a little bit unique about me. I mean, there's really a tendency, I think, as we're in the discovery phase to think primarily about meeting our obligations. How do we meet our obligations? How do we get data out the door? How do we do this defensibly? Like just thinking about like, how do we get the data out the door that we need to get out the door? How do we, represent our client in a way where we don't have to overextend our responsibilities? That we think about a lot, but we don't sort of simultaneously think about, okay, well, while we're in the data, how are we using that to support our legal strategy? And so I've always been really focused on that. That's what I loved about the white collar side of things. That's what I love about the practice of discovery. And I still do a lot of white collar cases. I mean, I still really help with a lot of DOJ and SEC investigations. There's a lot of data there, and there's a lot of work that has to be done sort of on the discovery side in those cases. And so those are my favorite types of cases to work on, just because I have that substantive expertise from really early in my career.
For you, then, so much of it is about the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love, so when I was in law school, I worked with the head of the trial program at Northwestern Law School on a book that he was writing called Lawyers as Storytellers. And he wrote that book, and I helped to edit it and put together the index. And then I was simultaneously coaching the undergraduate trial team, which I did for on and off for 20 years. And so when you have that perspective, I mean, I, as a human being outside of being a lawyer, I love stories. I think it's what connects us to people. I think it's, we love to share our own stories, and we love to hear stories in other people that are relatable to us. Like, I think that's just how we connect. And so when I was in law school, and that was sort of my formative years, right, as a lawyer, and I was learning about how important, especially in the trial phase, it is to be telling a narrative to the jury that they're going to understand and connect with. And then I was working on this book with my professor. That really shaped my perspective as an attorney. And I really think about that in my practice a lot, even though, I'm a discovery attorney, and that's not really normal. Like, I don't think it's normal for us to be sitting and thinking about that. That's what shapes a lot of my practice, is thinking about, okay, what is the story we're going to be telling in the opening statement, and how does this support that story? And I really do think about that quite a bit in my practice.
Yeah, on that point, the importance of the story versus meeting the discovery obligations. I mean, yes, we need to meet the obligations. How many cases did you win by meeting your discovery obligations?
That's a good question, right? There's
Right.
sort of I love that question because I think that really points out the nuance of it, right? Like, you can meet your obligations and you're doing your job, but I like to think, how can we contribute in a more substantive way? And, when you're in the discovery phase and you're the closest to the data first, there's really the opportunity to be really showing the case team how the legal strategy should be driven based on what the actual data is and what the facts are, as opposed to, okay, let's just work on getting everything out the door, and then let's go back and now try to figure out where the key documents are and what the story is and what the timeline is. I mean, when you're in the discovery phase and you're managing it, or whatever it is that you're doing to contribute to that phase, like, you really have an advantage to being able to help the case team craft the strategy. Okay, that strategy is not really supported by the facts, or this is a bad fact. So we need to figure out how to deal with this bad fact, or look at this strategy we hadn't even thought about. Like, look at these facts over here. This is actually telling a story we didn't know, and it's really helpful. We have the advantage of being right on the front lines.
We could spend the whole time and much more this morning just on the storytelling aspect, and maybe we'll come back and do an episode just on storytelling, because I want to talk about that more. However, there are a couple of other things I want to ask you about. First is about wellness. There's an institute you're involved in.
Yeah, so I am involved in the Institute for Wellbeing in the Law, which is called IWIL, IWIL. And I am on the communications committee for that organization. We're working on marketing, branding, connecting with people in the industry. And it's it's a really important organization. It's a really important initiative that's sort of happening in the legal field in recent years about really shining a spotlight on the fact that, just generally speaking, wellness is important, but especially in a really fast-paced, high-stress job like so many of us have, that it's so easy to focus on, your career and meeting the obligations of the stressful job and really letting wellness and well-being and mindfulness and health, slide to the back burner. And so it's an important organization that's important in sort of the initiatives that are happening now in the legal space, which I'm delighted to see.
When those things slide, what does that look like? What happens?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm so glad we're talking about this. I think for so long, it wasn't talked about. Like there was some sort of stigma. Like if you're a lawyer, you just have to be like hyper focused. Like you're hyper focused on your job and meeting your obligations, and there's no space for work-life balance, and there's no space to take a moment and and do some breathing. And I'm so glad that we're at least talking about it now, because the reality is, there's a lot of research that shows that if you have the time to unwind, if you have the space to have fulfillment in other areas of your life, if you are able to, spend time with your friends and your family, and you don't feel that you are disconnected to them because of your job, the research shows that you will ultimately perform much better at your job. So the impact of wellness is positive. The more we feel that we are having that time to unwind, and having the time to take a nap, and having the time to hang out with our families and our friends and do the things we love, we are then more capable in the times that we are focused on our jobs, because the human body and mind and psyche needs a break.
I recall a phrase that I used to hear. The law is a jealous mistress.
Ah,
yep, and it sounds like that's very much a part of it. How do you make that time? I mean, we know the pressures. The billing hours only continue. Billing hour requirements only continue to increase. Yeah. Anything less than perfection is considered not even adequate. You have all this non-billable work you're supposed to do as well. How do you make it work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily have the answer, but I can tell you just sort of through my experience. I mean, I think it's a few different factors. I think one thing that's really important is where you're working, because some places have higher expectations and have less awareness of the importance of wellness, and the importance of mindfulness, and the importance of taking a break and unwinding. I think that there are firms that are really key to it. They're really hip to it. They understand that it's important to unwind and have those breaks. So I think the venue really, I guess, is important, right? Like you're not going to get the same response and impact in every workplace. I think setting boundaries is really important. I think they have to be reasonable boundaries, and I think they have to be healthy boundaries, but I think that setting boundaries is appropriate. I think, and I think the pandemic actually helped us learn a little bit more about how to set boundaries, because our lives became one big glob where there was no separation between work and home anymore. It was all here. Like everything was happening in the same place. And I think that really made us realize that, like, okay, that maybe doesn't work for all of us to have no separation whatsoever. So now I need to, if I'm working from my home, And everyone knows that my phone and my computer are right there, and I could technically respond to emails at any time because we all know it's all in the same space. We sort of realized like we need to start setting some boundaries and say, you know, this is my time with my family or whatever it might be. And I think that's really important. I mean, I think setting boundaries is a way that you can also have those conversations with your case teams and with your teams and with your supervisors and say, this is the boundary I would like to set. You know, I would like to carve out 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. as my family time every night. I will always meet the obligations that I need to meet. If there's an emergency, I'll handle it, but that's my family time. So I will work, you know, the full day before that. And if there's something that needs to happen after that, I will be responsive, but that's my family time. I think that's a great boundary to set. I think that's something, you know, that you can have conversations with your team. My boundary is that I don't give out my cell phone number to anybody. Nobody has my cell phone number for work purposes. And so, you know, if someone wants to reach me, they email me or they call me on my work phone, which rings on my laptop, which is always by me, right? So that's my boundary, is that I don't share my cell phone because I have a lot of anxiety of behind the fact that my cell phone could be reached for work purposes. I don't know what that is for me, but like the idea of someone calling me for work on my cell phone causes me extreme anxiety. So that's my boundary.
Yep. These pressures can exacerbate challenges we already face. Any thoughts on that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I have thoughts. You know, it's really great to see law firms in particular focusing on mental health and hiring mental health ambassadors at the firms. I'm so happy to see that. I think we have a lot of progress, but I think that progress to still make, but I think that we have made some progress. I mean, I have been open about the fact that early in my career, I really struggled with depression a lot. And I'm in recovery. I'm sober. I've been sober for almost 6 years. And I struggled with alcoholism when I was, you know, for the first 15 years really of my career. And then no one talked about it. And it was something that really, there was a lot of shame around it. I felt very alone. Like I was the only person who was feeling this way. Like I was the only person who was struggling in this particular way. And the reality is that is not true. I was not alone. I just felt alone. And certainly there, you know, alcoholism and depression are diseases. They are no different from cancer or any other disease, heart disease. It's a disease. Like I caught alcoholism like you catch cancer, right? It's, you don't catch it. It's something that is, you know, part of your DNA and whatever. So, but being in such a high stress job certainly can really exacerbate some of those things. Like the stress can lead to anxiety and can exacerbate depression. And certainly, I mean, lawyers are in the top 3 professions of substance abuse and addiction.
Who do we share that distinction with?
It's I believe the other 2 are investment bankers and people in the medical field, so doctors and nurses. And it's historically been that same group of people because it's high stress. It's high stress. And I think in some ways, you know, we're looking for an outlet to take the edge off. And I think for a long time in the legal profession, you know, our social lives and our the things we did as a firm outside of work were really tied to drinking. And nobody really noticed if people were having like too good a time. You know, it was sort of like, oh, well, they've been working on a deal and it's been really stressful. So like, they're just blowing off some steam. When the reality is there's real addiction problems in the law and there's real substance abuse problems in the law. And it's really important to talk about it. And so people know that they're not alone. And I will tell you that I talk about it, and I want to talk about it because that's how I am and who I am. I'm just sort of an open book. But I know that 15 years ago, when I was a young lawyer and I was starting to really struggle with mental health and with addiction, if I had seen one other colleague say out loud, I'm sober, or I had issues with alcohol, or, sometimes I can't get out of bed and here's what that looks like for me. Mm-hmm. It would have changed without question. It would have changed my trajectory. Undoubtedly, because I felt very alone and I didn't really know what to do or how, who to talk to about it. And I'm giving you a very long answer to your very short question, but
that's okay.
We're sort of, as lawyers, we are part of our of what we do and who we are is that we're problem solvers and we're stoic and we know how to get stuff done, and we're we're strong and we're smart and we're savvy. And so when you're dealing with a disease, you can't outsmart it, right? And you can't out sophisticate it. It's like that's not how it works. But that's how we are as people. That's our training, and that's what we do for a living. And so when you're faced with this other thing that you don't really have any control over, it's like, oh my God, what do I do? It's like, what do I do now? I don't know how to do this.
And it sounds as if what you're saying is in part dealing with these you can't count on the answer coming from within. You can't become that much stronger, that much more resistant. It sounds as if the help needs to come from outside as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think for everyone, the answer to that question is probably a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I think that everyone's journey through mental health and through substance abuse and addiction, I think it's very personal. And so I think the answer to that is probably different for everyone. But I will tell you that having outside support and awareness and resources is almost always going to be a value add. I don't know, necessarily, certainly there's issues with codependency and things like that where maybe it's not a value add, but typically that is going to be a value add. And I said something like this to you yesterday about how I really believe that everyone wants this and needs the same thing, which is we all want to be seen. Everyone wants to be seen. And that can mean different things for different people, but we just want to be seen. And had someone seen that I was struggling, that would have been really powerful for me. That, if someone had seen that I was struggling and reached out to me, or I wanted for years, I was like, why isn't anyone helping me? It's nobody else's responsibility to help me, right? That's no one else's job. But I felt so alone and felt so like no one else can see what's going on. I didn't understand. I was really good at it. That's why. But I didn't understand why no one could see. And I just for years, I was like, can someone help me? Please, someone see me. Right. And so I think when we see the struggle in each other and recognize it and just say, I'm here, I think that's a really powerful offering.
So it sounds like one of the messages for all of us in here is, help our fellow humans.
Yeah.
Beyond that, what sort of resources can people go to for help?
Great question. There are resources that an organization like I Will can provide. One of the things I think has been great about this sort of awakening in mental health awareness is that firms and companies have really expanded resources. And I mean, my firm has an entire well-being program. We have a well-being ambassador. We have, confidential resources where you can reach out to hotlines and people who you can talk to confidentially about your mental health and substance abuse issues. The resources are really sort of readily available. I think there's still a little bit of this feeling like, oh, I can't reach out for help. What if somebody finds out? What if like I'm outed? Or what if, I don't think I can. I mean, I can tell you that those resources are really confidential, and people who are professionals in these areas are highly cognizant of the fact that this is something that is confidential, and it's important, to keep it an individualized conversation and journey.
We have only a few minutes left, but I still want to touch at least on a third topic.
Okay.
We're not going to get to go in depth, but
Okay.
let's see what we can do in the four and a half minutes we have here.
Okay.
Ethics.
Yeah.
And e-discovery in particular. You were just on a panel about that. You did the prep work.
Yeah.
You had that experience. I could go on, but tell us about ethics and e-discovery.
Yeah, so this is something I just did this panel with 5 amazing colleagues, and this was something that I sort of pitched the panel because in my own practice I was really starting to think about it, and I was like, well, I'm thinking about this, so other people must be thinking about this, and what does this look like? And I think e-discovery is tied to technology. That's not a news flash. It's not like breaking news alert that we're a technology-driven area of the law. And that's changing every moment of every day, faster and faster and faster. And, I think the big takeaway from our conversation, and the thing that I was really thinking a lot about, is like, how much do we have to know? We have the duty of competence, which means like we have to know enough to be competently practicing law and competently representing our clients. But what does competence mean when you're talking about technology, right? Like, do I have to know, as the lawyer representing my clients in discovery, do I have to know what every tool is out there? Do I have to know how every tool works? Do I have to know, the pros and cons of every tool and every piece of technology? Is that my responsibility? Is that my duty of competence? And I think the big takeaway from our panel, and the thing to really keep in mind, is the duty of competence means that you have to have awareness of the technology and some level of familiarity, but that you really need to have a team of people who are the experts in the technology. So I don't need to know how every single company's technology works, or even that it exists, but I do need to have my team of experts, litigation support personnel, whoever it is. I need to have them who I can go to and say, okay, now you help me understand this.
It sounds very much like issue spotting in law school.
Yeah, we're full circle back to law school. That was helpful how they taught us to do that.
Turns out it was, wasn't it? What sort of resources on that front did you find or discuss in the panel?
Yeah, I mean, I think the model rules are important to remind ourselves of. One of the things that I talked about on the panel was we haven't taken an ethics exam since we were in law school. I think it was like third year of law school, you have to take the ethics exam, right? So I'm not sure that anyone is a lawyer, unless you're a professional responsibility lawyer. I'm not sure any of us is like flipping through the model rules of professional responsibility on a daily basis, right?
So if I were to say model rule 1.1 comment 6, most people would have no idea what I'm talking about, right?
Well, because we can go reference it, but we're not sitting there going through it every day or with any amount of regularity. So I think it's important to refresh our recollection a little bit on what the rules actually say. And there have been, to your point about comments, there are new comments that address the evolution of the practice of law, including technology. California has a comment to its rules about technology specifically, and the duty of competence as it relates to technology. And so, I think it's important to sort of remind ourselves what those rules were, because, I mean, for me, it's been 20 years since I took an ethics exam, and so unless I have a specific reason to be looking up one of the rules, I really am not doing that on the regular. So I think that's something that's important, is the model rules, and to remind ourselves what those obligations look like.
Yeah, because we took the multi-state in law school, and we have
it's
time to go back to it, right?
Yeah, it's been a long time, and I mean the core rules, of course, are not changing as far as it goes, but just sort of reminding ourselves what they are is important.
Well, Alicia, thank you very much for joining us today. Alicia Hawley is a senior discovery attorney at Orrick. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Alicia, again, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was really great to be here. Thank you.